I still hear his voice when I close my eyes, standing there on the wooden deck with the ocean roaring behind him, pointing at the driveway like I was some unwanted guest, shouting that I needed to get out of his house immediately. My sister's husband looked me dead in the eye and told me to leave my own beach house, the place I bought with my own money, the place tied to some of the most painful and precious memories of my life. And the craziest part is that he really thought he could do it. He thought I'd just grab my bags, apologize, and disappear. I didn't. Instead, I made a decision that same night that would flip his entire world upside down. So, tell me honestly, if someone screamed at you to leave your own home, would you walk away, or would you make them regret ever opening their mouth? Let me rewind, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. And trust me, the picture is messy. The beach house wasn't just some random vacation property for me. I bought it 7 years ago, right after my divorce, during the lowest, quietest point of my life. I was 32, newly single, emotionally exhausted, and desperate for something that felt like mine again. The house itself wasn't huge or fancy. It was an older two-story place with weathered gray siding, a wide deck facing the ocean, and windows that rattled when the wind got strong. But the first time I stood on that deck and watched the waves roll in, I cried. Not pretty crying, ugly, chest-heaving sobs. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I poured everything I had into that place. My savings, my time, my energy. I fixed it up myself where I could, learned how to refinish floors from YouTube, painted walls late into the night, and slowly turned it into a home. That beach house became my sanctuary. My sister, Laura, has always been the opposite of me in a lot of ways. She's 2 years younger, more outgoing, more confident, the kind of person who can walk into a room and instantly be liked. Growing up, she was the golden child without even trying. I don't say that bitterly, it's just how it was. I was the quieter one, the responsible one. Laura was the sparkly one. We were close, though, especially after our parents passed away in a car accident when we were in our 20s. Losing them bonded us in a way nothing else could. For a long time, it felt like we only had each other. Then Laura met Mark. Even writing his name makes my jaw tighten. At first, he seemed fine, charming, confident, successful. He worked in finance, always dressed well, always had a story to tell. He made Laura laugh, and she looked genuinely happy, so I tried to ignore the small red flags. The way he interrupted her sometimes. The way he subtly corrected her in front of others. The way he'd make jokes that were just a little too sharp, and then laugh them off as, just kidding. When I brought it up gently once, Laura brushed it off and said I was being protective. Maybe I was. I wanted to believe she knew what she was doing. They got married 3 years ago in a beautiful ceremony that, ironically, took place on a beach not far from my house. I let them use my place for wedding prep, photos, the whole thing. I didn't charge them a dime. I was genuinely happy for her. After the wedding, Mark started acting a little entitled. That's the best word for it. He'd talk about family assets and shared resources in this way that made my skin crawl. Once, over dinner, he casually mentioned that the beach house would be perfect for family holidays now that we're all settled. I laughed and said, "Yeah, you're welcome to visit when I'm there." He smiled, but there was something cold in his eyes, like he was filing that comment away. Over time, Laura and Mark started visiting more often. At first, they always asked. Then it turned into, "Hey, we're thinking of coming down this weekend, that cool?" And eventually, it became statements instead of questions. "We'll be at the beach house Friday." I should have shut it down earlier. I know that now. But part of me felt guilty saying no to my sister, especially since she lived in the city and said the beach helped her relax. So I tolerated it. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Things shifted about 6 months ago. I had been spending more time at the beach house because my job went partially remote, and I could work from there. It was quieter, calmer. Mark didn't like that. He made comments about how I was hogging the place, how it was a shame such a great house wasn't being used by the whole family. One weekend, I arrived to find them already there, without any warning. My food in the fridge moved around. My personal things touched. Mark acted like it was completely normal, even joked about how he'd reorganized the kitchen. Better. I was furious, but again, I swallowed it. Laura looked uncomfortable, and I didn't want to start a fight in front of her. The real tension started the weekend of the blow-up. It was supposed to be my quiet weekend. I had a stressful month at work and just wanted to be alone. I told Laura clearly that I was going to the beach house and needed some space. She said she understood. Friday afternoon, I drove down, windows open, music loud, already feeling lighter. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. Mark's car was there. Not just his car, but another one too. I parked and walked up to the house, heart pounding. Inside, I found Mark, two of his friends, and Laura, all drinking beers like it was some kind of guy's getaway. Music was blasting. My couch was covered in sand. One of his friends had his feet up on my coffee table. I asked, as calmly as I could, what was going on. Mark didn't even look guilty. He said, "Oh, babe. Hope you don't mind. The guys needed a break, and this place is perfect." I reminded him that I had said I was coming alone. He laughed and said, "Relax, it's a big house." Laura avoided my eyes. That hurt more than anything else. I tried to make the best of it. I really did. I stayed in my room, worked, kept to myself, but Mark kept pushing. He made loud comments about me being uptight and not knowing how to share. Saturday evening after a long day, I went out onto the deck with a glass of wine, hoping to watch the sunset. Mark followed me out. He was clearly drunk. He started ranting about how weird it was that I clung to this house, how families share things, how Laura deserved access to it just as much as I did. I told him, firmly, that the house was in my name, that I had bought it long before he was in the picture, and that he needed to respect my boundaries. That's when he snapped. His face changed completely. He stepped closer, towering over me, and raised his voice so loud I was afraid the neighbors would hear. He told me that I was selfish, that I was ruining family harmony, and then he pointed toward the driveway and yelled, "If you don't like it, you can leave. Get out of my house, my house." Those words hit me like a slap. I felt something break inside me. Laura rushed out then, trying to calm him down, but he doubled down, shouting that Laura was his wife, and that everything she had was his now. I looked at my sister, waiting for her to say something, anything. She whispered, "Mark, stop." But she didn't contradict him. She didn't say it was my house. She didn't stand up for me. I went inside, shaking. I packed a small bag, not because I thought he was right, but because I needed space before I did something I couldn't undo. As I drove away, tears blurred my vision, but underneath the hurt, something else was growing. Anger. Cold, focused anger. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a weekend or a house. This was about respect, about control, about someone thinking they could bully me out of my own life. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed everything in my head, every comment Mark had made over the years, every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. And I realized something else. Mark didn't just think he could kick me out. He thought he had already won. He thought Laura would back him no matter what. He thought I was weak. So that's the situation I was in. Sitting alone in a cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling, knowing that if I let this go, it would never stop. Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to pause for a second and put yourself in my place. Your sister's husband screams at you to leave your own home, and your sister barely says a word. Do you confront them? Do you cut them off? Or do you do something that makes sure they never cross you again? Seriously, comment what you would have done, because at that moment, I was standing at a crossroads. By morning, my sadness had hardened into resolve. I started making calls. I pulled up documents. I checked dates and receipts and messages I'd saved over the years without really knowing why. I remembered offhand comments Mark had made, the way he bragged about cutting corners, the shady business opportunities he hinted at when he'd had a few drinks. I realized I had more leverage than he thought. The beach house wasn't the only thing he'd tried to claim that didn't belong to him. I drove back toward the beach that afternoon, but I didn't go to the house. Instead, I parked down the street and watched. Mark and his friends were on the deck, laughing, drinking, completely relaxed, like kings who just conquered a territory. Laura was there too, quieter, sitting apart from them. Seeing her like that twisted my stomach, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just doing this for me anymore. I was doing it because someone needed to stop Mark. I went back to my car, heart pounding, and sent a message to Laura asking if we could talk privately later. She replied hours later with a simple, "Okay." That told me everything I needed to know. Mark was controlling the narrative, and she was letting him. That night, I started setting things in motion. I didn't yell. I didn't confront him again. I planned. Carefully, methodically, because if Mark had taught me anything, it was that power doesn't come from volume. It comes from preparation. And that's where I'm going to stop for now, because what happened next deserves its own space. The choices I made that night would change my relationship with my sister forever and expose a side of Mark that he had worked very hard to hide. In part 2, I'll tell you exactly how I made him regret telling me to leave my own beach house and what the fallout looked like when the truth finally came out. By the time the sun came up the next morning, I felt strangely calm, like my emotions had burned themselves out overnight and left behind something sharper and more dangerous. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking, and the more I thought about everything Mark had said, everything he'd done, the more I realized this wasn't just about one drunken outburst. This was about a man who genuinely believed he could erase me, overwrite my ownership, and bend my sister's reality until his version of the truth was the only one left standing. I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. If I stay silent now, what happens next? Does he eventually convince Laura the house is his? Does he start making decisions for her money, her time, her relationships? Does she slowly disappear? That thought scared me more than anything else. I started with the most boring but powerful weapon I had. Paperwork. I went through every document related to the beach house. The deed was solely in my name. The mortgage was paid off early, entirely by me. The property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, all under my accounts. Mark had never contributed a single dollar. I knew this already, of course, but seeing it all laid out so cleanly gave me confidence. Then I went deeper. I remembered something Mark had said months earlier at a family dinner, bragging about how he'd optimized his finances by moving money around between accounts. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes. Now, I searched my old messages and emails. I found a text he'd sent me once, late at night, when he was drunk, asking if I knew a good accountant who doesn't ask too many questions. I had laughed it off back then. Now, I took screenshots. I spent that day making calls. First, I called a lawyer. Not to sue anyone, not yet, but to understand my options. I explained the situation calmly, leaving emotion out of it. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew: Mark had zero legal claim to the house. If he ever tried to force access or claim ownership, he'd be laughed out of court. I asked about something else too, something that had been nagging at me. What if someone stayed on your property after being told to leave? What if they invited others without permission? The word, trespassing, came up more than once. I didn't act on it immediately, but I filed that information away. Then I did something that took more courage than any legal maneuver. I called Laura. She didn't answer at first. I left a voicemail, my voice steady but soft, telling her I needed to talk to her alone, not with Mark hovering nearby, not filtered through his anger. Hours passed. I distracted myself by walking along the shoreline, letting the cold water numb my feet, trying to remember what it felt like to be sisters without tension. Finally, she called back. She sounded tired, drained. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between the city and the beach, neutral ground. When I saw her sitting there, stirring her coffee without drinking it, my anger wavered. She looked smaller somehow. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked her the question that had been burning in my chest since the night before. I asked her why she didn't correct Mark when he said the house was his. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She said she didn't want to make things worse. She said he'd been under a lot of stress. She said he didn't mean it. Every excuse landed like a punch to my ribs. I told her, gently but firmly, that silence was still a choice. That by saying nothing, she'd sided with him. That's when something cracked. Laura admitted things she'd never said out loud before. She told me Mark had been controlling for a while now. Not physically, but emotionally, financially. He monitored her spending. He questioned her decisions. He got angry when she talked to me too much. He'd convinced her that I looked down on him, that I was trying to undermine their marriage. Hearing that made my stomach churn. He'd been isolating her, piece by piece, and I'd been too focused on keeping the peace to notice how bad it had gotten. I told her everything then, about the lawyer, about the documents, about how serious this was. I told her that if Mark ever tried something like that again, I wouldn't hesitate to involve authorities. I wasn't threatening her. I was protecting myself, and maybe, indirectly, protecting her too. She listened quietly, nodding, wiping her tears. She didn't defend him this time. She just looked scared. Before we left, I asked her one last thing. Did Mark know about some of the financial shortcuts he'd bragged about? Her face went pale. She whispered, "Some of them." That confirmed it. Mark's confidence didn't come from strength. It came from secrets. I went back to the beach house that evening, not to confront him, but to reclaim my space. I brought a locksmith with me, completely legal, completely justified. I changed the locks, every single one, front door, back door, garage. I installed a temporary security camera system I'd already ordered online months ago, but never bothered to set up. While the locksmith worked, Mark's car pulled into the driveway. The timing was almost poetic. He stormed out of the car, already shouting, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I stayed calm. I told him I was securing my property. He laughed, that same arrogant laugh, and told me I couldn't lock him out of his wife's family house. That's when I did something I'll never forget. I pulled out a folder and handed it to him. Copies of the deed, copies of tax records, a letter from my lawyer stating clearly that he had no ownership, no rights, and no permission to be on the property without my consent. His face changed as he flipped through the pages. The confidence drained out of him, replaced by something darker, rage mixed with fear. He started yelling again, louder this time, but the words didn't land the same way. They bounced off me. I told him calmly that he and his friends needed to leave immediately or I'd call the police for trespassing. Laura arrived then, running up the driveway, panic written all over her face. She begged us both to stop. Mark turned on her, accusing her of betraying him, of siding with me. Watching that unfold was like watching a curtain get ripped down. For the first time, she saw him the way I did. Not charming, not confident, just cruel and desperate to maintain control. He yelled so loudly that neighbors started peeking out of their houses. I dialed the non-emergency police line and told them there was a disturbance on my property. Mark froze when he realized I was serious. The police arrived within minutes. I explained the situation calmly, handed over the documents, and told them I wanted Mark and his guests removed from my property. The officers listened, reviewed the paperwork, and then turned to Mark. They asked him to leave. He argued. He blustered. He tried to pull the family matter card. None of it worked. Eventually, he grabbed his keys, swore under his breath, and stormed off, his friends trailing behind him like embarrassed children. Laura stayed behind, shaking. After they left, she collapsed onto the steps and sobbed. I sat beside her, not saying, "I told you so," not rubbing it in, just letting her cry. That night, she didn't go home with him. She stayed with me at the beach house, the same place he'd tried to take from both of us in different ways. We talked for hours, about our parents, about who we used to be, about how easily love can turn into a cage when you're not paying attention. But the story doesn't end there, because Mark wasn't done. A few days later, Laura told me she'd asked him for space. His response was to spiral. He sent her dozens of messages, alternating between apologies and threats. He accused me of poisoning her against him. Then, like an idiot, he did the one thing I'd quietly hoped he would do. He put his financial shortcuts into writing. In a long, angry email meant for Laura, he bragged about how he'd hidden money, how no one could touch him, how he'd handled things behind the scenes. Laura forwarded it to me, hands shaking. I sent that email straight to my lawyer. What followed was fast and brutal. Audits, investigations. Mark's job put him on leave almost immediately. Friends distanced themselves. The confident man who'd screamed at me to leave my own house suddenly found himself fighting to keep his career, his reputation, his marriage. Laura filed for separation shortly after. She moved into a small apartment near me, started therapy, started rebuilding herself piece by piece. It wasn't easy. There were days she missed him, days she doubted herself. But she never once questioned whether standing up to him was the right choice. As for me, the beach house feels different now. Lighter. Safer. Like it truly belongs to me again. I still sit on the deck at sunset, wine glass in hand, listening to the waves. Sometimes I think about that night, about how close I came to just driving away and letting him have his illusion of power. And I'm grateful I didn't. So was I wrong for what I did? For calling the police? For involving lawyers? For setting boundaries that shattered a marriage? I don't think so. I think the moment someone tells you to leave your own home, they've already crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just protect you. Sometimes it saves someone else too. If you were on my side in this story, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Because trust me, life has a way of delivering them. And I really want to know what you think about all of this, so drop your final thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you all in the next story.